This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
So far in this series, I have compared the Pittsburgh Steelers to a Ford Taurus and the Baltimore Ravens to an iPhone. If you want to have that make more sense, I really recommend you watch some of the recent videos I put out about the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. But now it's time to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. And this was the hardest team for me to find something that reminds me of Cincinnati. At first, I was going to go with the Chrysler 300C because the Chrysler 300C is a very nice car. It's probably the nicest Chrysler you can get. It's just also trying to be something else. And there's a parallel that you could throw in there where the Bengals are a very nice version of what the Bengals are, but they want to be something more than that. So they imitate it, but they end up kind of just reminding you of the thing that you actually wanted in the first place. But I didn't love that comp. It wasn't good enough for me because there's a lot of other elements with the Bengals going on. And I can see how people will just hear a Chrysler 300C comp and just think I'm being a troll or outright negative on Cincinnati, which is not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be very productive about how I talk about the Bengals because, again, AFC North has good teams, but I just want to talk about some of these things that are very unique to these teams in an interesting way. And then it hit me. You know what the Cincinnati Bengals are? They're Nintendo. I hope that shows up well. This is my copy of Breath of the Wild for the Nintendo Switch. And the Cincinnati Bengals are Nintendo. Nintendo makes great video games. They make very successful things. Cincinnati Bengals have put out good football. They have been pretty successful at football from a win and loss standpoint for a long time. This game right here, Breath of the Wild, masterpiece. As good as a game on the Nintendo Switch could be. But the other part with Nintendo is because it's Nintendo, because Nintendo itself is not a big multinational conglomerate on the same size as Sony or especially Microsoft, things happen on a little bit of a smaller scale at Nintendo. If you've played a Nintendo console within the last 10 years, you know this. The graphics are never as good as PlayStation or Xbox. Now, part of that is because they don't have the resources to compete with Microsoft or to compete with Sony at the scale that Sony and Microsoft are competing at. So they made a strategic decision to not go that hard into their hardware and, release games on lower spec stuff. Reason for it aside, Nintendo, in a world where people are putting $200 million into video games that nobody even hears about, they are this third option that figures it out on a smaller budget. Breath of the Wild is an amazing game, but it's also an amazing game that you wonder to yourself, man, what if this had more of a budget? What if they could spend a little bit more money? What if they could afford to go all? What if this were on PlayStation with the kind of budgets that PlayStation throws at their video games? What if this were on Xbox with the kind of budget that Microsoft provides? What could this be if it weren't limited to being on a Nintendo console? Because while Breath of the Wild is a great game, while the Nintendo Switch is a great console, you're always wondering with any game that succeeds on this platform if it's being held back by existing on that platform, because you know that the money, the resources, the budget that can go into a great Nintendo game is not the same as any other console. Which brings me to the Cincinnati Bengals. You look to yourself and you go, damn, Joe Burrow is great. Jamar Chase is great. T. Higgins is great. This Cincinnati team, they're pretty damn good. But do they have the resources to put together a team for a long run to be able to live up to the expectations? Will Joe Burrow get another team outside of his rookie deal years where they're going to have enough around him to win a championship with, or to get back to the Super Bowl? Or like with Breath of the Wild, are we always going to wonder, man, what if Joe Burrow played for the San Francisco 49ers or the Cleveland Browns or the Philadelphia Eagles or any of these other teams that are willing to spend the resources around a player that Cincinnati just can't? That is why the Bengals remind me of Nintendo. Remind me of Breath of the Wild. Remind me of a Nintendo Switch. All of those things are great. Nintendo is a good video game company, a great video game company. Breath of the Wild is a great game. The Nintendo Switch is a great console. But you wonder, man, what if they could go further with this? What if this Switch had the power of a Stream Deck? What if Breath of the Wild were released on a proper PS5 power level console? The question with the Bengals isn't if they're going to be good. Nintendo stuff is usually good. The question with the Bengals is, will this reach its peak potential? Or will it always feel limited by being on Nintendo? Will the Bengals always feel limited by the limitations that exist because they are the Bengals? Will Joe Burrow's career feel like they got the most out of it? Will the Bengals this year feel like you're getting the most out of them? Or will their limitations pop up? Cleveland is like Microsoft, right? Cleveland has the money to buy and spend, and they have the most money in the AFC North. They're willing to spend it. They got it. You know, Baltimore on a similar scale, they're not as money rich as the Browns, but they got it, right? They're Sony. The Bengals have to compete with those two or find their own lane with those two teams, not by spending as much as those two teams have, but by figuring out ways around it. That is the Cincinnati Bengals. They are never going to spend the money that Jimmy Haslam is spending. They can never compete with that. They can never compete with Baltimore from a dollar standpoint, or even Pittsburgh, who's similarly a mom and pop shop. The Pittsburgh Steelers brand is immensely larger than the Cincinnati Bengals, like at least like 10 times larger than what the Bengals fan base is. The Steelers don't need to be owned by people who are multi-billionaires, because the Steelers themselves are truly worth billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. Similar to like the Los Angeles Lakers. The Bengals, on the other hand, they're not in a great market. They're not a historic brand associated with the bedrock of the NFL like the Browns or Steelers. They just ain't got it like that. So they have to make things work within a budget, which makes things interesting when you look at how their offseason went. This offseason, the Cincinnati Bengals lost Cheeto, their starting corner, Tyler Boyd, the third wide receiver, DJ Reader, Jonah Williams, Joe Mixon. So amongst those, I count 5 starters. Their plan to replace those starters, though, is much more sufficient than what I find Baltimore's plan to be, right? At wide receiver 3, I think they have young players that they're going to have fill in similar to Baltimore, but those young players are of, I think, substantially better quality of prospect, right? You got Jermaine Burton and Andre Iosivas there versus Baltimore, who has Rashad Bateman, who is not really lived up to his first round draft status. And you have maybe Tez Walker, who was not very impressive at the Senior Bowl. Defensive tackle, yes, you lost DJ Reader. They brought back in Sheldon Rankins. They also drafted Chris Jenkins in the second round to help kind of fill that void. No, it's not the same as having DJ Reader. Losing DJ Reader is going to be a big miss for this Bengals defense, a defense that struggled to stop the run once DJ Reader got injured last year. So that's going to be something to be concerned about going forward if Bengal fans are worried about their ability to stop the run. And I think that's a fair thing to be concerned about. You lose Jonah Williams, but I think that's fine. You bring in Armarius Mims. Even though Armarius Mims has limited tape and is a question mark at right tackle, I feel like the same is true for Jonah Williams. Like, yeah, Jonah Williams' tape is not limited, but what we've seen of it feels limited. And I think I'd rather take the gamble on Armarius Mims being a much better right tackle than rolling out Jonah Williams. So I don't blame them for making that move. And then they go from Joe Mixon to Zach Moss. If you've watched this channel for a while, you would know I've never thought that Joe Mixon was this top tier running back that Bengal fans try to tell you he is. I think he's very similar to Najee Harris, where he's just a generic starting running back in the NFL. So I think replacing him with Zach Moss, it's a cheaper move. It's a lateral move. It's a okay move here. Where I think the Bengals have upgraded are at right tackle and at safety. Right, they brought back Von Bell. They signed Geno Stone. Where I think they downgraded is at defensive tackle. Now, their linebacking core, I tend to be a big fan of. I like the linebackers that the Bengals had. They did not have a great year last year, but as Browns fans, we know what not having your starting defensive tackle can do to your linebacker play, especially in a modern NFL landscape where your linebackers just aren't as big as they used to be. If your defensive tackles go down, it's much easier to get to the second level. It's much easier to make those players less effective. Ultimately, the Cincinnati Bengals season is going to come down to the same factors that it's been coming down to for the last few years. How well does Joe Burrow play? How healthy does Joe Burrow stay? And how well does this Bengals defense play? I think that's the most important thing. The Cincinnati Bengals are a team that will only go as far as the defense can take them. Is this a team that I think this year has the potential to win a Super Bowl? I would be skeptical. Right, for similar reasons on why I would be skeptical of Baltimore's ability to win a Super Bowl this year, because it just feels more like a reload than it does. It just feels more like a reload leaning into a rebuild to kind of figure out how you want to construct a roster around a quarterback that you signed to a multi-year deal than a all-out let's go for it type year. Like, it feels like, hey, we want to figure out what we have in Andre Iosivas or Jermaine Burton. We're going to figure out what we have in Armarius Mims. We're going to figure out what we have in Cam Taylor-Britt and DJ Turner. Now, they did make some moves that do feel like, hey, they want to be a better team than they were last year, even when Joe Burrow was in there before the injury got. Even before Joe Burrow's injury, I think a lot of Bengal fans, if they're sipping truth serum, would admit they did not feel like the ceiling was as high on that Bengal team as Bengal teams of year past, as Bengal teams from the couple of years prior, because that defense was not performing at a high enough or consistent enough level to justify thinking that that team could get it back to the Super Bowl. They struggled. Whether it was Joe Burrow, they struggled at times. There were times where the defense was clicking, Joe Burrow was clicking, and they looked excellent, like against San Francisco in San Francisco. But there were also times where they lost games that you really felt like they shouldn't have lost, or they looked worse in games than you felt like they should have, given the discrepancy of talent at the time that the game was played. The Bengals are an interesting team. You're going to focus on Joe Burrow. You're going to focus on Jamar Chase. It's where your eyes naturally go. But this team is about its defense. And if the defense is playing at a high level, if they're able to close off the cap of this defense by having Von Bell back, by bringing in Geno Stone, some veterans to hold down the fort, then they will be a better team than they were last year. What that means and how far that goes, I don't know. There seems to be a lot of debate on just exactly how good Joe Burrow is. I don't know where Joe Burrow's ceiling is, but what I do know is that his baseline is pretty damn good. He's somebody who, if he does get hot, you can ride a very far way because he's that kind of player. I think too much is made of the Joe Cool, Super Joe clutch stuff. And I think that's just people wanting to make something happen before it does happen. But don't let that cloud your vision on Joe Burrow's overall play. He is a really, really good quarterback. And when he is hot, he plays at a very, very high level that's able to carry a team like the Bengals further than what their roster suggests their ceiling should be. The Bengals, to me, are the surest bet in the AFC North. I think there's tremendous potential for high and low, for good and bad scenarios to pop out of both Cleveland and Baltimore, right? I think both options are on the table for those two teams. When I look at Pittsburgh, they are a sure bet, but they're not like a sure bet to be a team that can get to the AFC Championship game. I would think that that's very much not very likely for that team. The Bengals are a team where I'm pretty sure they have a solid 20% chance to make the AFC Conference Championship game. It's not impossible. I don't think it's very likely for them to make it this year, but if it does happen, I'm not going to sit here and be surprised by it. They have Joe Burrow. They have Jamar Chase. There's potential for that defense to return to form, and when Lou Anarumo is running that defense at a high level, it's a very good football team. And when you have that and the consistency of knowing that you have Joe Burrow back there at quarterback, making a run in the playoffs is not the most difficult thing in the world. So that's where I'm at with Cincinnati. I'm not really as low on Cincinnati as other people are. I know some people are using this year to be out on them because of the whole T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson thing, but that seemed like they got that figured out. Trey Hendrickson and T. Higgins seem like they're going to play this year. And if that's the case, then they're going to be fine. Now, if Trey Hendrickson did not play this year for the Bengals, that would be a massive issue, right? If he held out for his contract or retired or something. But that looks like that's not going to happen. So I think I'm in a pretty good place where the Bengals are. I think they're the surest, safest bet in the AFC North. Like, I wouldn't call the Bengals the number one favorite to win the division. I think that's going to go between Baltimore and Cleveland. I think those are the two teams that should be favored to win the division. But no matter if you have Baltimore at one, no matter if you have Cleveland at one, number two is always going to be the Cincinnati Bengals when it comes to who you think has the second best chance to win the division. Right? You either flip Cleveland from 1 to 3 or you flip Baltimore from 1 to 3. The Bengals stay at 2. And if both of those teams don't have the seasons that they hope they could have, or have some of the holes in their roster manifest itself, then you can see the Bengals easily winning the division. So that's where I'm at with the Bengals. I think that's who they are this year. I think that's who they are a safe bet to be. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a good day. Have an even better night. Peace.